Words carelessly spoken in moments of frustration can unleash consequences beyond imagination. The mistress never considered that her casual comment would transform into the catalyst for her own downfall. Have you ever uttered words in anger, only to witness them take a life of their own, spiraling beyond your control? That pain of realizing too late the weight of your own careless words is what connects us across centuries to this forgotten chapter of American history. The year was 1856 on the prosperous Willowbrook plantation in Georgia, where fields of cotton stretched across rolling hills like a sea of white clouds beneath the merciless southern sun. The plantation house stood proud with its white columns and wide verandas, a monument to wealth built upon the broken backs of those who toiled without compensation, without freedom. In this world of stark contrasts, where opulence existed alongside misery, lived Elizabeth Harrington, the young wife of plantation owner Thomas Harrington, and among their many enslaved people, a man called Isaiah. Elizabeth was beautiful and refined, raised in the comfortable embrace of wealth in Charleston society. At 22 years of age, her marriage to Thomas had been arranged by families more interested in combining fortunes than hearts. She found plantation life isolating, far from the social gatherings and cultural events that had filled her days. Thomas, 20 years her senior, spent most of his time managing business affairs, traveling frequently to Augusta and Savannah, leaving his young wife to the quietude of rural life. Her loneliness manifested as capricious cruelty toward those enslaved on the plantation, particularly the household servants who bore the brunt of her dissatisfaction. Isaiah occupied an unusual position at Willowbrook. At 35 years of age, he had been with the Harrington family since childhood, having been purchased by Thomas's father. His intelligence and literacy, secretly obtained despite laws forbidding the education of enslaved people, made him valuable as Thomas's personal attendant and occasional bookkeeper. Thomas trusted Isaiah with sensitive information about the plantation's finances, something that caused resentment among the white overseers. Isaiah moved between worlds, neither fully accepted in either, carrying himself with a dignity that some found admirable and others found insufferable. The air hung heavy with humidity one July afternoon as Elizabeth sat in the drawing room, fanning herself languorously while complaining to her visiting cousin Margaret about her husband. The window stood open in a futile attempt to catch any passing breeze, the gauzy curtains occasionally stirring in what barely qualified as wind. The scent of magnolias drifted in from the garden, mingling with the aroma of tea served in delicate porcelain cups. From her position, Elizabeth could see Isaiah in the study across the hall, organizing her husband's papers as he prepared for Thomas's return from a 2-week business trip. "Thomas has become absolutely impossible to live with," Elizabeth confided to her cousin as she glanced toward the study where Isaiah worked. "Always concerned with ledgers and cotton prices, never with me. The way he questions my household expenditures as if I were one of his servants to be managed." Margaret nodded sympathetically as she sipped her tea, well versed in the complaints of unhappily married women in their social circle. Elizabeth lowered her voice, though not enough to prevent her words from carrying. "He annoys me beyond measure. Sometimes I simply want him to disappear." "Isaiah," she said more loudly, directing her attention to the enslaved man who had paused in his work, "bring us more tea, and be quick about it." Her tone carried the casual cruelty of one accustomed to instant obedience. Isaiah entered the drawing room moments later, his face an impassive mask as he refreshed their tea. "Yes, mistress," he said, his voice carefully modulated to reveal nothing of his thoughts. "Will there be anything else?" Elizabeth waved him away dismissively, already returning to her complaints about Thomas. As Isaiah left the room, his mind worked rapidly, processing what he had just heard, weighing possibilities and risks against years of accumulated grievances and desperate hopes. For years, Isaiah had been secretly documenting the plantation's finances, creating a hidden record of Thomas's business dealings. He knew about the gambling debts that Thomas concealed from his wife, the loans taken against the plantation, and most significantly, the recently changed will that would leave everything to Elizabeth should Thomas die unexpectedly. Isaiah had also been part of a clandestine network, helping enslaved people escape north to freedom, a dangerous endeavor that had already cost the lives of several conspirators, discovered by plantation owners in neighboring counties. The brutal public whippings and hangings served as gruesome warnings to others contemplating resistance. That evening, as cicadas filled the air with their persistent chorus and fireflies began their luminous dance across the darkening lawn, Isaiah made his way to the small cabin at the edge of the slave quarters where Naomi lived. At 50 years old, Naomi served as the plantation's healer, her knowledge of herbs and remedies making her indispensable to both the enslaved community and occasionally the Harrington family. Her cabin smelled of dried plants hanging from the rafters, mysterious powders in small clay pots, and the perpetual fire that burned in her small hearth regardless of the season. "We have an opportunity," Isaiah told her in hushed tones as they sat in the dimly lit cabin. "But I need your help." Naomi's eyes, wise with years of witnessed suffering, studied him carefully. Her hands, gnarled from decades of cotton picking before her knowledge of medicine saved her from the fields, rested on her worn skirt. "What kind of opportunity brings such darkness to your eyes?" she asked. "The kind that could free many, but at great risk," he answered. Over the next several weeks, a plan took shape in whispered conversations and secret meetings. Isaiah continued his work in the main house, maintaining his role as the trusted servant while gathering information. He learned from conversations between Thomas and his business partners about an upcoming journey to Charleston, where Thomas would be transporting a significant amount of money to settle debts and make new investments. Elizabeth, frustrated by her husband's continued absences, grew increasingly bitter, her casual cruelty toward the household enslaved people intensifying. One evening, as Thomas discussed his travel plans with Elizabeth over dinner, Isaiah served them silently, absorbing every detail. Thomas would travel with only his driver, carrying bank drafts and gold coins worth thousands of dollars. The journey would take them through a stretch of road infamous for its isolation, bordered by dense forest perfect for an ambush. The pieces of Isaiah's plan aligned with a precision that felt almost predestined. 3 days before Thomas's planned departure, Isaiah approached Elizabeth as she sat alone on the veranda, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "Mistress," he said, his voice respectful but direct, "I have information that may be of interest to you." Elizabeth looked at him with surprise, unaccustomed to being addressed without being called upon first. "What could you possibly have to tell me?" she asked, her tone dismissive yet curious. "I believe Master Thomas is not being truthful about his business dealings," Isaiah said carefully. "He has been concealing significant losses and debts. I fear for the future of Willowbrook." Elizabeth's attention was fully captured now, her eyes narrowing. "How would you know such things?" she demanded. Isaiah explained his role in organizing Thomas's papers, revealing knowledge of the financial troubles that Thomas had hidden from his wife. With each word, he watched Elizabeth's expression shift from skepticism to concern to anger. Over the following days, Isaiah fed Elizabeth carefully selected information, stoking her resentment and fear while positioning himself as an unlikely ally. He spoke of overheard conversations about Thomas potentially selling some of her family jewelry to cover debts, of plans to reduce household expenses that would affect her comfort. With each revelation, Elizabeth's anger toward her husband grew, her casual wish for his disappearance evolving into something more concrete and dangerous. 2 nights before Thomas's journey, Elizabeth summoned Isaiah to her private sitting room, an unprecedented action that raised eyebrows among the other household servants. In the candlelit room, she spoke in direct terms. "If what you say is true, then I am at risk of losing everything. What do you suggest?" The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Isaiah maintained his carefully crafted demeanor of reluctant loyalty. "I only wish to protect Willowbrook, mistress," he said. "If something were to happen to Master during his journey, the new will ensures everything would pass to you." Elizabeth did not ask how he knew about the will. Instead, she studied him with calculating eyes. "And what would you gain from helping me?" she asked. Isaiah lowered his gaze. "Perhaps, mistress, consideration for my family. My sister and her children in the fields endure much hardship." He did not mention freedom, did not need to make the request explicit. Elizabeth understood the negotiation taking place. The following day, Elizabeth invited her husband's driver to her sitting room, dismissing Isaiah, who had brought the man to her. Hours later, the driver emerged, his expression unreadable as he returned to his quarters. That night, Isaiah met with Naomi again. "It is done," he told her. "The master will not return from his journey." Naomi closed her eyes briefly, her face solemn. "May God have mercy on all our souls," she whispered. "There is no turning back now." Thomas departed early the next morning, the carriage wheels crunching on the gravel driveway as Elizabeth watched from the veranda, her face composed into an appropriate expression of wifely concern. Isaiah stood at attention nearby, his eyes meeting those of the driver briefly before the carriage disappeared down the tree-lined avenue. Elizabeth returned to the house without a word, retiring to her room with instructions not to be disturbed. 3 days passed with no word from Thomas, then 4. On the 5th day, a rider arrived with news that sent the plantation into chaos. Thomas Harrington had been found dead in a ravine several miles from the main road, his carriage apparently having lost control on a sharp turn. The driver was nowhere to be found, nor was the substantial sum of money Thomas had been carrying. The sheriff suspected highway robbery, not uncommon on that isolated stretch of road. Elizabeth performed the role of grieving widow with convincing skill, receiving condolences from neighboring plantation owners and friends who traveled to Willowbrook upon hearing the news. In private, she summoned Isaiah. "Everything happened as you predicted," she said, her voice steady despite the enormity of what had transpired. "You have proven your loyalty. I will see that your sister and her children are moved to household duties as promised." But Isaiah knew the dangerous game was far from over. In the days that followed, as Elizabeth began to assert her authority as the new owner of Willowbrook, Isaiah implemented the next phase of his plan. Late at night, he secretly accessed Thomas's hidden safe in the study, removing documents that detailed legitimate business transactions and replacing them with forged papers that suggested financial mismanagement and fraud. He adjusted ledgers, altered figures, and removed bank drafts, creating a false narrative of impending financial ruin. Meanwhile, the driver who had supposedly disappeared after the attack on Thomas made his way north along secret routes established by the Underground Railroad, carrying with him not only his own freedom, but also a portion of Thomas's money that would fund the escape of others. The rest of the money Isaiah had hidden in a location known only to him, a resource that would soon serve a greater purpose. 2 weeks after Thomas's funeral, Isaiah approached Elizabeth with grave concern. "Mistress," he said, "I have been reviewing the master's papers as you instructed, and I fear the situation is worse than we imagined. According to these documents, Willowbrook is deeply in debt. The bank in Savannah may soon call in loans that cannot be repaid." Elizabeth paled at this news, her newfound security suddenly threatened. "Show me," she demanded. Isaiah presented the forged documents, watching as she struggled to understand the complex financial information. "This cannot be possible," she insisted. "Thomas always said Willowbrook was prosperous." Isaiah shook his head sadly. "The master kept many secrets, mistress. Perhaps that is why he traveled with so much money to settle urgent debts." In the following days, Isaiah introduced Elizabeth to a man named James Caldwell, supposedly a banker from Augusta who had done business with Thomas. In reality, he was a free black man who sometimes worked with the Underground Railroad, disguising himself as white to move more freely through Southern society. Caldwell confirmed Isaiah's dire assessment of Willowbrook's finances, suggesting that Elizabeth might need to sell the plantation before the banks foreclosed. Panic took hold of Elizabeth as her world once again seemed to crumble. The prospect of losing her position and returning to her family in disgrace was unthinkable. When Caldwell offered to purchase Willowbrook for a fraction of its true value, presenting it as an act of charity given the plantation's supposedly precarious financial state, Elizabeth saw it as her only escape. The transaction was arranged with unusual speed, documents signed and money exchanged before anyone in local society realized what was happening. The morning after the sale was completed, Elizabeth awoke to find the household in upheaval. Many of the enslaved people, including Isaiah, had disappeared in the night. As she frantically summoned the overseers, a knock came at the front door. The sheriff stood there, accompanied by representatives from the bank in Savannah. "Madam," the sheriff said, removing his hat, "I regret to inform you that serious allegations have been made concerning your involvement in your husband's death." The color drained from Elizabeth's face as the sheriff continued. The driver, believed dead, had been found alive in Tennessee. He had signed a sworn statement claiming that Elizabeth had approached him with a plan to ambush Thomas on the road, promising him freedom and money in exchange for his cooperation. Furthermore, the bank representatives had received anonymous information that led them to discover the fraudulent nature of the documents used to justify the hasty sale of Willowbrook. In a matter of hours, Elizabeth Harrington went from plantation mistress to prisoner, her protestations of innocence falling on deaf ears as evidence mounted against her. The mysterious buyer, James Caldwell, could not be found. Most damning of all, a search of Elizabeth's personal belongings revealed a letter in her handwriting that outlined the plot against Thomas, apparently intended for her cousin Margaret, but never sent. Elizabeth insisted she had written no such letter, but the handwriting experts summoned by the court declared it authentic. What Elizabeth never discovered was that Isaiah had spent years studying her handwriting as he organized Thomas's correspondence, becoming adept at mimicking her elegant script. The letter had been his masterwork, a forgery so perfect that not even Elizabeth herself could convincingly deny its authenticity. The final betrayal in a chain of betrayals that had begun with her casual, cruel wish. As fall painted the Georgia countryside in brilliant hues of red and gold, a remarkable transformation took place at Willowbrook. The plantation, purchased with Thomas's stolen money laundered through the fictitious James Caldwell, became something unprecedented in the region, a settlement of free black families, many of them formerly enslaved at Willowbrook and neighboring plantations. The legal ownership was obscured through complex arrangements involving sympathetic Northern abolitionists, creating a precarious but functioning refuge. Isaiah, who had orchestrated the entire scheme from the moment he overheard Elizabeth's careless wish, stood on the porch of what had once been the overseer's house, now his own home. Beside him stood Naomi, her wise eyes taking in the sight of people working the land for themselves, keeping the fruits of their own labor for the first time. Children played where once they would have been put to work in the fields. Adults walked with straight backs and raised heads. "We have created something miraculous," Naomi said softly. "But at what cost?" Isaiah watched a group of children running freely across a field that had once been watered with the sweat and blood of their parents. The cost was high, he acknowledged. Deception, manipulation, theft, and perhaps even murder, though he had never confirmed whether the driver had actually killed Thomas or merely abandoned him on the road. But what was taken from us over generations? Not just labor and freedom, but dignity, family, identity, everything. News eventually reached Willowbrook that Elizabeth Harrington had been found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and fraud. She would spend the rest of her life in prison, her fall from privileged mistress to disgraced prisoner serving as a cautionary tale in Georgia society. Her casual cruelty, her thoughtless wish for her husband to disappear, had indeed been granted, but the price had been everything she valued. Isaiah knew that their fragile paradise could not last forever. Southern society would not tolerate this experiment once its true nature was discovered. Plans were already in place to gradually move everyone north over the coming years, using Willowbrook as a temporary haven and way station for others seeking freedom. But for this brief, precious moment, they had created a community of free people on land that had once been their prison. The story of Willowbrook reminds us that words carelessly spoken can unleash forces beyond our control. Elizabeth's thoughtless wish became the catalyst for her downfall, while Isaiah's careful planning transformed oppression into opportunity. In the intricate dance of betrayal and justice, both lost and gained in measures they never anticipated. As we reflect on this hidden chapter of history, we are reminded that the human spirit's yearning for freedom can transform even the most desperate circumstances into pathways for liberation. If these stories of courage and betrayal during the slavery era touch your heart as they touch mine, I invite you to join our community. By subscribing to the channel, you'll have access to carefully researched stories that reveal long-hidden truths about our past, helping to understand wounds that still echo in our society. It's not just about knowing history, but about honoring the memory of those who lived these realities. Click subscribe and let's journey together in discovery and reflection.